Clara Thompson was born in a small frontier town, where the dirt roads stretched between wooden houses and the air carried the scent of pine and dust. Life in the town was simple, but it was also strict. People knew everyone's business, and even small mistakes could lead to gossip that lasted for months. Clara had always been a bright and lively girl, known for her cheerful laugh and her willingness to help anyone in need. She loved running through the fields behind her house, feeling the sun on her face and the wind in her hair. She had dreams of adventure and a life beyond the narrow streets of the town. But those dreams were often pushed aside by the weight of rules and expectations. Clara grew up in a family that valued reputation above everything else. Her parents, hard-working and respected in the community, expected their children to follow the path laid out for them. For Clara, that meant helping her mother with the chores, tending to the garden, and learning to sew and cook. She did all these things willingly. But she also held a secret world of thoughts and dreams inside her. She loved reading, writing little stories, and imagining a life where she could explore beyond the horizon. But the town had its rules, and dreams were often set aside for reality. As Clara entered her teenage years, she became more aware of the world around her. She noticed the way boys and girls talked, the way families watched each other closely, and the way small mistakes could have serious consequences. It was during this time that Clara met James, a kind young man who had recently moved to the town. He was gentle and thoughtful, someone who shared her love for stories and her curiosity about life beyond the frontier. They spent many afternoons together, walking by the river, sharing ideas, and dreaming of a future that seemed brighter than the dusty streets of their town. For Clara, those moments with James were filled with laughter and hope, a temporary escape from the strict rules she had grown up with. But life in the frontier town was not forgiving. Clara's joy and innocence were suddenly tested when she discovered she was pregnant. Fear and confusion gripped her heart. She had grown up hearing stories of families being shunned and lives being ruined by a single mistake. The thought of telling her parents filled her with dread. She imagined the whispers of neighbors, the disapproving looks, and the shame that could follow her forever. Clara knew that her world was about to change in ways she could not control. When Clara finally told her parents, the news was met with shock and anger. Her father's face turned pale, and her mother's hands trembled as they listened. They had always hoped for Clara to have a safe and respected life, and this news seemed like a disaster. The town, with its strict rules and watchful eyes, would never accept what had happened. Her parents tried to find a solution, but in the end, the decision was made that Clara could no longer live in the town. She was to leave, to start a new life elsewhere, away from the judgment of neighbors and relatives. The pain of leaving her home was unbearable. Every familiar street, every corner where she had played and laughed, now seemed like a reminder of what she had lost. She felt a deep sense of loneliness, as if the world she had known was closing behind her forever. Clara packed her few belongings, including a small trunk with clothes, a few treasured books, and a worn notebook filled with her stories and dreams. Her heart ached with sorrow and fear. She knew that life beyond the town would be difficult, filled with challenges she had never faced before. She worried about how she would care for her child, how she would find food, shelter, and safety in a world that seemed vast and unforgiving. Yet, beneath the fear, there was a spark of determination. Clara was young, but she was not ready to give up. She wanted her child to have a life filled with love and opportunity, even if it meant enduring hardship herself. As Clara stepped out of the familiar streets of her hometown, she felt a mixture of sadness and resolve. The townspeople watched her leave, some with curiosity, others with judgment. Whispers followed her, carrying rumors of her departure. Clara kept her head high, refusing to let shame dictate her future. She walked with small, determined steps, each one taking her further from the place she had called home and closer to the unknown world that awaited her. She knew the journey ahead would not be easy, but she also knew that she had the strength to survive, for the sake of herself and the child she carried. The first weeks were the hardest. Clara had to learn to navigate a world that was far less forgiving than the streets she had known. She found a small settlement a few miles away, where she could work in exchange for shelter and food. The work was exhausting, often leaving her hands raw and her body tired, but she endured it. She learned to mend clothes, cook for strangers, and tend to small gardens. Every task she completed was a step toward building a new life, one where she could care for her child and reclaim her independence. Despite the hardships, Clara's spirit remained strong. She discovered a resilience within herself that she had never known, a quiet courage that grew with each passing day. In the evenings, Clara would sit by the fire, her child sleeping beside her, and write in her notebook. She recorded her experiences, her fears, and her hopes. Writing became a refuge, a way to make sense of the world and to remind herself of the person she wanted to become. Through these small acts, Clara nurtured her own sense of identity and purpose. She refused to let the judgment of others define her. Instead, she focused on the life she wanted to create, one filled with love, learning, and hope. Even as she struggled, Clara never forgot her past. Memories of her hometown, her family, and the life she had left behind stayed with her. She missed the simple pleasures of home, the laughter of friends, the familiar faces of neighbors, and the comfort of her family's presence. But she also understood that those memories were part of her strength. They reminded her of what she had endured, and they fueled her determination to create a better future. She knew that one day, she might return, not as a girl forced to leave, but as a woman who had built a life on her own terms. Clara's journey was not just about survival. It was about growth. Each challenge she faced, each obstacle she overcame, shaped her into a stronger, more resilient person. She learned to trust herself, to make difficult decisions, and to persevere in the face of adversity. She realized that while the town had rejected her, the world beyond its borders offered possibilities she had never imagined. With each passing day, her confidence grew, and so did her hope for the future. By the end of that first year, away from her hometown, Clara had built a small home, cultivated a garden, and established a modest routine. She had also given birth to her child, Samuel, who became the center of her world. The hardships had not disappeared, but Clara had found a rhythm, a way to face each day with courage and determination. She often thought about the town she had left behind, about the people who had judged her, and about the life she had once dreamed of. But instead of dwelling on the past, she focused on the future, knowing that her actions today would shape the life she wanted for herself and for Samuel. Clara's story in that first year is one of courage, determination, and resilience. It is a story of a young girl forced to leave her home, yet finding the strength to create a new life. It is a story of a mother's love, a woman's perseverance, and the quiet power of hope. Clara Thompson, once a girl shunned by her town, began to grow into a woman who would one day return, not as the outcast they remembered, but as someone who had faced life's hardships and emerged stronger, wiser, and unbreakable. Life outside Clara's hometown was far harder than she had imagined, but she faced it with a quiet determination that never wavered. The first few months were the hardest. She had to learn how to make ends meet in a place where nobody knew her, where every stranger looked at her with curiosity or doubt. Some offered help, while others seemed to judge her silently, unaware of the burdens she carried. But Clara refused to let fear or shame control her life. She had a child to care for, a tiny boy named Samuel, whose bright eyes seemed to hold the hope and promise of a new beginning. Clara found a small cabin on the edge of the settlement, barely more than 4 walls and a roof, but it was enough to start. The land around it was rough, filled with rocks and patches of wild grass, yet she worked tirelessly to clear a small garden. Every morning before dawn, she would rise, prepare a simple breakfast for herself and Samuel, and tend to the garden. planting vegetables and herbs that would sustain them through the seasons. She learned to cook with whatever ingredients she could find, making simple meals stretch further than they should. There were nights when the cold seeped through the walls, when the wind howled outside and Samuel cried for warmth, but Clara would hold him close and whisper promises of a better life. Finding work was a challenge, but Clara's determination never faltered. She took odd jobs wherever she could, mending clothes for neighbors, carrying water, helping in the fields, and even assisting the local midwife when she could. Each task was exhausting, but it brought a small sense of security. She began to realize that her struggles, while heavy, were shaping her into someone stronger than she had ever been. She learned patience, resourcefulness, and the quiet strength that comes from relying on oneself. Every coin she earned went toward food, clothing, and the little things Samuel needed. But more importantly, each day brought the satisfaction of knowing she could survive, and not just survive, she could thrive. Samuel grew quickly, a curious and lively boy who reminded Clara daily why she worked so hard. He had his mother's bright eyes and fearless spirit. Clara would watch him play near the cabin, climbing small hills, chasing after chickens, and asking endless questions about the world. She did her best to answer, teaching him about plants, animals, and the stars that lit up the night sky. Even in the midst of hardship, Clara found joy in these small moments, realizing that life could still hold beauty and laughter. She tried to protect Samuel from the harsh realities of the world, though she knew he would one day have to face them. For now, she focused on giving him love, security, and the example of courage through action. Over time, Clara's reputation in the settlement began to grow. People noticed her hard work, her reliability, and her kindness. Slowly, the whispers of judgment turned into nods of respect. When someone needed help, Clara was the first they called. She became known for her skill in gardening, her careful hands with children, and her willingness to lend a hand no matter how busy she was. It was not the life she had dreamed of as a young girl running through her hometown, but it was real, and it was hers. She had built it with her own hands, and that brought her a quiet pride she had never felt before. Clara also began to explore ways to support herself more sustainably. She had noticed that many women in the settlement gave birth with little help, often struggling alone. Remembering how she had been guided and supported by kind hands during her own pregnancy, Clara began learning midwifery from the local midwife. She watched, listened, and practiced carefully, eager to gain skills that could help others, while also providing her with a means to earn a living. Soon, she was assisting mothers during childbirth, offering comfort, guidance, and practical help. People began to trust her, and even those who had initially been wary of her soon recognized her gentle nature and competence. Helping others gave Clara a sense of purpose that went beyond survival. It reminded her that even in hardship, she could make a difference in the lives of others. Life was not without setbacks. There were seasons when the crops failed, when Samuel fell ill, or when she had to take on grueling work just to keep food on the table. Clara often felt exhaustion settle deep in her bones, a weight that seemed heavier at times than she could bear. Yet, she never allowed herself to give in to despair. She reminded herself daily why she had left her hometown and why she continued to persevere. Every challenge was an opportunity to learn, to grow, and to protect Samuel. She learned to stretch what little she had, to find joy in the simplest moments, and to rely on the small network of friends she had built in the settlement. As the years passed, Clara's life slowly began to take shape. She built a sturdier home, one that could withstand storms and cold winters. She expanded her garden, planting not only vegetables but also flowers, bringing color and life to the cabin's surroundings. Samuel grew taller and stronger, learning skills alongside his mother, helping in the garden, gathering firewood, and observing the world with the curiosity that Clara encouraged. She taught him the values she had learned through hardship: resilience, honesty, compassion, and self-reliance. She wanted him to grow up knowing that life could be challenging, but that with courage and determination, he could face anything. Clara also found moments of quiet joy in her own personal growth. She continued to write in her notebook, recording her thoughts, her dreams, and the stories that had always lived in her heart. Writing became a refuge, a place where she could reflect on her journey and imagine the life she wanted for Samuel and herself. Her creativity allowed her to remember who she was before hardship, even as she embraced the strength she had gained. She found that even in the toughest times, there was space for hope, imagination, and beauty. Despite the isolation, Clara also discovered the power of connection. She formed friendships with other women in the settlement, sharing experiences, laughter, and advice. These friendships became a support system, a reminder that she was not truly alone. When someone fell ill, she helped. When a neighbor struggled with work, she lent a hand. These small acts of kindness strengthened her bonds with the community and reinforced her sense of purpose. Clara realized that even though she had been cast out from her hometown, she could create a new family of friends, built on respect, trust, and shared experiences. The years passed quietly but meaningfully. Clara and Samuel adapted to their life, facing challenges with courage and celebrating small victories together. Her skills as a midwife grew, earning her respect and gratitude from the people she helped. Her garden flourished, providing food and beauty alike, and through it all, Samuel thrived, growing into a thoughtful, kind, and intelligent boy who carried his mother's resilience in his heart. Clara often reflected on how far they had come. From the fear and uncertainty of leaving her hometown, she had built a life filled with love, respect, and accomplishment. She had faced hardship head-on, never losing sight of her goals or her sense of self-worth. Clara's journey during those 13 years was not just about survival, it was about transformation. The girl who had been forced out of her town had become a strong, capable woman, admired for her skills, respected for her kindness, and loved for her courage. Every challenge she faced, every sleepless night, and every moment of doubt had shaped her into the person she had become. She had proven to herself that life could be difficult, but it could also be beautiful when met with determination and hope. By the time Samuel was a young boy of 10, Clara had created a life that was both stable and fulfilling. She had achieved a balance between work, home, and personal growth. And she had built a foundation of love and learning for her son. She often thought of her hometown, the place that had once cast her out, and she wondered how it had changed, or if it had changed at all. Those memories of judgment and exclusion were still painful, but they no longer held power over her. Clara had grown beyond the girl who had been shunned. She was now a woman of strength, experience, and quiet confidence, ready for whatever the future might bring. Clara knew, deep in her heart, that someday she might return to the town that had once rejected her, not as the frightened, uncertain girl she had been, but as a woman who had faced life's trials and emerged stronger, wiser, and resilient. She did not yet know when that day would come, but she felt the stirring of a plan, a hope that one day she could confront her past with dignity and pride. Until then, she focused on building a life of love, purpose, and accomplishment, knowing that she had already overcome more than many could imagine. The story of those 13 years is one of courage, perseverance, and transformation. Clara Thompson, once a young girl forced to leave her home for circumstances beyond her control, had created a life filled with resilience, joy, and purpose. She had nurtured her son, built a home, gained respect, and learned the value of her own strength. She had faced hardship with unwavering determination and had turned every challenge into an opportunity for growth. And though her past still lingered in her thoughts, it no longer defined her. Clara had learned that even in the darkest times, hope, courage, and love could light the path forward. 13 years had passed since Clara Thompson had been forced to leave her hometown. In that time, she had grown from a frightened, uncertain girl into a strong, confident woman. She had built a life from scratch, learning to survive, to nurture, and to thrive. But now, a thought had begun to take root in her mind, the thought of returning. Not as the scared, judged girl she had once been, but as someone who had faced the world and emerged stronger than anyone could have imagined. Clara had spent weeks preparing for the journey back. She packed carefully, bringing only what was necessary: a few clothes, her notebook filled with memories and stories, and essentials for Samuel. But more than anything, she carried a quiet confidence, a sense that she was finally ready to face the town that had once cast her out. Samuel, now a bright and curious boy of 13, walked beside her, holding her hand tightly. He had heard the stories of their hometown and the hardships his mother had endured, but he had also seen the strength she had built over the years. Together, they traveled the familiar paths, the dirt roads stretching ahead, lined with trees that seemed smaller than Clara remembered. As they approached the outskirts of the town, Clara's heart began to beat faster. Memories flooded her mind, the streets she had once walked, the wooden houses, the faces that had once looked at her with judgment. She felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. What would people think? Would they recognize her? Or would she simply pass like a stranger? Would her family still remember her? Or had time dulled their memories? She pushed these questions aside, focusing instead on the strength she had gained and the life she had built. The town had changed in some ways and remained the same in others. New buildings had been added, and some old homes had been replaced. Yet the general atmosphere, the rhythm of life, the familiar streets, the town square, felt unchanged. Clara walked slowly, taking in every detail. She noticed neighbors chatting outside their homes, children playing near the river, and shopkeepers arranging goods in front of their stores. She felt a strange mixture of nostalgia and pride. The town had once rejected her, but now she returned not for forgiveness, not for acceptance, but simply to show that she had survived and had thrived. As they moved further into the heart of the town, Clara noticed whispers and curious glances. Some people stopped their work to stare as she passed, while others exchanged quiet remarks to each other. It was clear that her presence had not gone unnoticed. Clara walked with her head held high, refusing to let the whispers unsettle her. Samuel walked beside her proudly, aware that his mother had accomplished something remarkable. He looked around with interest, curious about the town that had been a part of his mother's story but had never been his home. Clara's first stop was her old family home. She paused at the gate, memories flooding her mind. The wooden fence was weathered, and the garden that had once been her mother's pride had changed. She took a deep breath and knocked on the door. When her mother opened it, her eyes widened in shock. Clara's mother, who had once looked at her with disappointment and fear, now saw a woman who radiated confidence, strength, and dignity. Samuel stepped forward, and Clara introduced him gently, explaining who they were. The reunion was emotional. Tears were shed, and words of astonishment filled the air. Clara's mother could hardly believe the young girl she had sent away had grown into such a remarkable woman. Neighbors soon gathered, drawn by the sight of Clara and her son. Many remembered the young girl who had left the town in disgrace, and now they saw someone entirely different. Her posture, the way she carried herself, and the quiet confidence in her voice all spoke of a life built on resilience and courage. People whispered to one another, expressing surprise, curiosity, and even admiration. Clara did not seek to justify her past or apologize for the circumstances that had forced her to leave. Instead, she simply showed through her presence that she had faced life's challenges and had emerged stronger and wiser. Clara walked through the streets, visiting familiar places from her past. She stopped by the old schoolhouse, remembering the days she had spent learning and dreaming. She passed the church where her parents had once taken her, recalling the sense of comfort and community she had felt before the events that changed her life. Everywhere she went, she felt the weight of the past mingled with the pride of her present. She realized that returning to her hometown was not just about revisiting memories, it was about showing that she had grown beyond them. One of the most striking moments came when Clara entered the town square. A small crowd had gathered, sensing that someone familiar, yet changed, had returned. Some faces were curious, some skeptical, and some clearly astonished. Clara walked calmly, her eyes meeting those of people who had once whispered about her, judged her, or looked down upon her. She could see the surprise and even respect in their eyes. She smiled gently, not out of pride, but from a quiet satisfaction that came from knowing she had built a life of substance and meaning. Clara also reconnected with old friends, those who had remained kind despite the town's judgment. They were amazed at how she had survived and grown. Some had heard fragments of her story over the years, and now they could see the full picture. A woman who had endured hardship, cared for her child, and become a skilled midwife and respected member of her new community. These friends welcomed her warmly, offering support, admiration, and in some cases, apologies for past misunderstandings. Clara accepted their kindness with grace, understanding that time had changed people as much as it had changed her. Samuel, observing all of this, was fascinated. He saw firsthand how people reacted to his mother's return, how their surprise slowly turned into respect. He felt proud of her, understanding that her courage and determination were the reasons they could stand there today, not as outcasts, but as a family who had built something meaningful. He asked questions, listened to stories, and began to form his own understanding of the life his mother had created. Clara answered him with honesty and care, explaining how the past had shaped her, but how it no longer defined them. During her visit, Clara also encountered challenges. Some townspeople were still hesitant to approach, still holding on to old judgments. There were subtle comments, lingering looks, and quiet skepticism. But Clara faced these moments with calmness. She knew that she did not need to convince anyone of her worth. Her life, her son, and her accomplishments spoke louder than words. She remained kind, composed, and confident, demonstrating that she had moved beyond fear and shame. Her dignity became her statement, and it was more powerful than any argument or explanation could have been. As the day wore on, Clara decided to attend the town's evening gathering, a place where most of the community came together. She entered quietly, taking in the familiar space. Eyes turned toward her, whispers rippled through the crowd, and a sense of anticipation hung in the air. When she spoke, her voice was steady and clear, recounting small stories of her life beyond the town, the work she had done, and the lessons she had learned. People listened attentively, realizing that the young girl they had once judged had transformed into a woman of experience, wisdom, and resilience. By the end of the evening, the atmosphere had shifted. What had begun as surprise and skepticism gradually became admiration and respect. Neighbors approached Clara to offer congratulations, share memories, and ask for advice. Even those who had once judged her harshly could not deny the strength and dignity she displayed. Clara responded with kindness, humility, and grace, showing that she had not returned to confront or accuse, but simply to live with pride in the life she had created. Walking back to her temporary lodgings that night, Clara felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The town that had once been a place of fear and rejection now recognized her strength. She had returned not as someone seeking validation, but as someone who had proven to herself, above all else, that she was capable of building a life of meaning and purpose. Samuel walked beside her, holding her hand, and she could see the pride and admiration in his eyes. Together, they had faced the past and returned stronger than ever. Clara's return to her hometown was not just about confronting the past. It was about reclaiming her story. She had been cast out, but she had built a life that could not be diminished by judgment or gossip. She had nurtured her child, gained respect, and created a home filled with love, resilience, and dignity. The town had changed in its perception of her, but even more importantly, Clara had changed in her own understanding of herself. She no longer needed approval or acceptance. She had found strength, pride, and fulfillment within herself. By the time Clara left the town for the night, she knew that her return had made a lasting impact. People had seen the life she had built, the person she had become, and the love she shared with her son. She had faced her fears, revisited painful memories, and emerged with grace and courage. And while she would continue her life elsewhere, the knowledge that she had reclaimed her story, her dignity, and her strength would stay with her forever. Clara Thompson's return after 13 years was not just a visit. It was a triumph. It was proof that perseverance, courage, and love could overcome even the harshest judgment. It was a reminder that the past, no matter how painful, could be faced with dignity. And most importantly, it was a celebration of a woman who had grown from a frightened girl into someone whose strength and resilience could inspire not only her son, but everyone who had once doubted her. After her return to the town, Clara Thompson spent the next few days reconnecting with the places and people that had once been part of her life. Each street, each familiar building, seemed to carry echoes of memories she had both cherished and struggled to leave behind. Yet, walking through them now, she felt no fear or shame. Instead, she felt the quiet pride of someone who had endured hardship, worked tirelessly to build a meaningful life, and returned not as a victim of circumstances, but as a testament to resilience and strength. The townspeople were still talking about her return. Some came forward to greet her, others simply watched from a distance. Clara understood the mix of emotions in their eyes: curiosity, surprise, admiration, and perhaps a little guilt for the way they had treated her in the past. She moved gracefully through the town, always polite, always composed, never letting past pain cloud her interactions. Her focus was on the people she loved and cared for, on Samuel, and on the satisfaction of seeing that her return was already changing the way people thought about her. Clara's presence began to draw attention not just because of her story, but because of how she carried herself. She walked with confidence, spoke with clarity, and treated everyone she met with respect, no matter how they had treated her before. People began to realize that the girl they had judged so harshly had grown into a woman of remarkable character. Mothers who had once whispered about her in gossip now approached her for advice on raising their children. Young girls who had admired her courage from afar began to seek her guidance. Even some of the older townspeople, who had been skeptical or critical in the past, started to acknowledge her strength quietly, showing respect in small, meaningful ways. Clara also took the opportunity to reconnect with old friends who had remained kind and supportive during the difficult years. These reunions were filled with warmth and laughter. They shared stories of the years gone by, exchanged memories of the past, and marveled at the changes life had brought. Some had heard bits of her story, but seeing her in person, seeing the life she had built, inspired admiration and even a little awe. Clara listened to their stories, offered advice, and shared lessons she had learned about perseverance, courage, and the importance of nurturing love and community. One morning, Clara decided to visit the local schoolhouse, where she had once been a student. The building had been renovated, but the memories it held remained vivid. She walked through the familiar halls, noticing the old wooden desks and the chalkboard that had been replaced. Children ran past her, curious about the stranger who seemed so familiar, and teachers paused to greet her respectfully. Clara spoke with the principal and explained her experiences over the years, the challenges she had faced, and the work she had done to care for others. Her words were met with admiration and even inspiration. The children listened with wide eyes, seeing her not only as a symbol of resilience, but also as someone who had transformed hardship into strength. During her time in the town, Clara also visited the marketplace. She saw familiar faces who had once judged her harshly, and new faces who had only heard stories. The whispers followed her, but instead of causing fear or discomfort, they served as reminders of how far she had come. Shopkeepers who had once been indifferent now greeted her with respect, asking her advice on matters ranging from simple daily tasks to more complex challenges in their work. Some neighbors sought her guidance for family matters, recognizing that the wisdom she had gained through experience was invaluable. Clara gave advice generously, offering her insights with kindness and humility. As days passed, Clara realized that her return was not just about reconnecting with the town, it was about giving back. She began to offer her services as a midwife to those in need, helping expectant mothers and teaching young women skills she had learned over the years. She organized small gatherings where mothers and daughters could learn about childcare, cooking, and the ways to create stability in their homes. Her reputation grew quickly, and soon people from nearby towns began to hear of Clara Thompson, the woman who had returned not to seek revenge or attention, but to share knowledge, love, and guidance. Samuel, observing his mother's interactions, felt a sense of pride and admiration. He had grown into a young boy who understood the importance of courage, perseverance, and kindness. He saw firsthand the impact his mother had on the town and how her wisdom and compassion inspired others. Clara encouraged him to participate, teaching him the values she had nurtured over the years: respect, empathy, responsibility, and the power of determination. Together, they created a small ripple of positive change that extended far beyond their immediate circle. Clara also took time to visit her old neighbors, those who had once been critical of her departure. She did not approach them with anger or resentment, even when they hesitated or offered awkward apologies. Instead, she spoke with calm dignity, sharing her experiences and showing them through her words and actions that life could be transformed through courage and perseverance. Slowly, walls of skepticism began to crumble. People who had once doubted her character now recognized her integrity, and even those who had been critical began to treat her with respect. It was a quiet victory, but a deeply meaningful one. The townspeople were especially surprised to see Samuel. He carried himself with quiet confidence, clearly reflecting the values his mother had instilled in him. People noted his intelligence, curiosity, and kind nature, often remarking that he seemed to embody the lessons Clara had worked so hard to teach. For many, Samuel's presence was proof of Clara's dedication, resilience, and love. She had not only built a life for herself, but had also raised a child who would continue her legacy of strength and integrity. One afternoon, the town organized a small gathering in Clara's honor. Friends, neighbors, and even those who had once been distant or skeptical came together to acknowledge her return and the life she had built. There were speeches, heartfelt words, and moments of reflection. People shared memories of the past, spoke of the challenges Clara had overcome, and expressed their admiration for her courage and determination. Clara listened quietly, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. She had returned not for recognition, but for closure, and yet the respect she received was a testament to her unwavering strength and the life she had created. During this gathering, Clara was approached by a group of young women who had once admired her from afar. They asked for advice on pursuing their own dreams and facing challenges with courage. Clara smiled warmly, sharing her experiences openly. She spoke of the importance of perseverance, learning from hardship, and nurturing self-respect. She emphasized that true strength came not from avoiding difficulties, but from facing them with honesty, resilience, and compassion. The young women listened intently, inspired by her story and by the example she had set through her actions and character. That evening, Clara took a quiet walk through the town square, reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. She remembered the girl she had been, the fear she had felt, and the pain of being cast out. But she also remembered every moment of courage, every step she had taken to build a life of meaning, and every act of love and kindness she had shared. She realized that the power of her story lay not in the judgment she had faced, but in the choices she had made, the life she had built, and the strength she had nurtured. She understood that returning to the town had been about reclaiming her story, and in doing so, she had inspired others to see the possibilities within themselves. Clara also spent time with her mother, rebuilding their relationship. They shared conversations that were honest, emotional, and healing. Clara's mother expressed regret for the way she had treated her daughter, and Clara responded with forgiveness, understanding that people's actions are often guided by fear or uncertainty. Together, they reflected on the past, shared laughter and tears, and began to move forward with a renewed sense of love and connection. For Clara, this reconciliation was one of the most meaningful aspects of her return. It reminded her that even the deepest wounds could heal when met with honesty, courage, and compassion. As Clara prepared to leave the town, she knew that her return had accomplished something far greater than she had initially imagined. She had faced her past, shown resilience, and inspired respect. She had reconnected with friends and family, shared her knowledge and wisdom, and demonstrated that life could be rebuilt even after great hardship. More than that, she had created a legacy for Samuel, a life filled with love, courage, and the lessons of perseverance. On the day of her departure, townspeople gathered to bid Clara and Samuel farewell. There were smiles, tears, and heartfelt words of admiration. People expressed gratitude for her return, for the wisdom she had shared, and for the example she had set. Clara thanked them sincerely, acknowledging their support and kindness, but also reminding them that the true strength of a person comes from within. She left with a heart full of fulfillment, knowing that she had turned a chapter of pain and rejection into one of triumph, respect, and inspiration. As Clara and Samuel walked away from the town, the sun setting behind the hills, she felt a sense of peace she had never known before. She had returned to face her past, not for revenge or validation, but to show that life could be transformed through courage, determination, and love. Her journey had come full circle from a frightened girl forced out of her home to a strong, confident woman who had reclaimed her story and inspired those around her. Clara Thompson's story, once marked by hardship and rejection, had become a tale of triumph and inspiration. She had proven that resilience, love, and courage could overcome even the harshest judgment. She had built a life of meaning, raised a remarkable son, and returned to her hometown to show that true strength comes from perseverance and self-respect. Her journey was a testament to the power of hope, determination, and the human spirit. A reminder that no matter the challenges faced, it is always possible to rise, rebuild, and shine. Walking hand in hand with Samuel, Clara looked toward the horizon, knowing that their journey was far from over, but that they had already achieved something remarkable. They had faced the past, embraced the present, and walked confidently toward the future. And in that moment, Clara knew, with a quiet certainty, that they could overcome anything together, carrying the lessons of courage, love, and resilience into every step of their lives.